Salutations, gentle viewers. This is George from Ireland, and in this video I shall carry on my series about the Second World War on the Eastern Front. Today I'm going to particularly speak about some barbarous crimes committed by members of the Wehrmacht. I don't suggest that everyone in the Wehrmacht, or even most people in the Wehrmacht, participated in such crimes against humanity. Nonetheless, atrocities occurred on a large scale, and there were very many of them too. So, we're still trying to do value-free history. Perhaps it would be remiss of me not to say this. Am I making a moral judgment? Maybe I am. So perhaps I'm contradicting myself and not doing value-free history. So trying to speak about this in as neutral a tone as I can and let the facts speak for themselves. So the Einsatzgruppen was formed within the German military, and these were drawn from ordinary soldiers as well as some policemen. Often they'd just been village bobbies. And there are only 3,000 men in the Einsatzgruppen. These groups, they were tasked with the murder of Jewish people, both sexes of all ages. They had to cover a 3,000-mile front. So they signed up for this task, Jewish civilians would be rounded up and shot dead at close range. Any decent person would acknowledge that's a monstrous crime. This is not killing people in combat. Could you bring yourself to kill a grandmother? I hope not. Can anyone bring themselves to kill an infant? Surely not. It's nauseating, but there are psychopaths out there. So even some men who'd volunteered for this grisly task found it galling to commit willful murder of people who'd not done anything wrong at all. These unoffending civilians were butchered. Some of these men vomited after what they'd done, others were plagued by guilt, and they were racked with nightmares. So the High Command decided they must arrive at a more efficient and less harrowing means of killing civilians, and it had to be double quick. So they devised a new means. Anyway, January 1942, the Wannsee Conference was held at a little mansion beside a lake just outside Berlin. Wannsee is the name of the lake. See can mean a lake. Over the course of 2 hours, the Holocaust was planned, or as the Nazis called it, the final solution to the Jewish question. I've been in the house. It's still open to the public. It's a very pretty little house, completed just before the First World War. And it's astonishing to think in this idyllic and a placid location, such a barbarous scheme could have been hatched. In the occupied USSR, local men and women occasionally volunteered to assist in the persecution and even extermination of the Jewish community. Anti-Semitism was a centuries-old trope in some of these lands. I'm not suggesting that everyone subscribed to this disgusting prejudice. In Lithuania in particular, quite a few people eagerly participated in the murder of their Jewish neighbours. Some Jewish men were even battered to death with hammers on the street. So countless more grisly crimes were committed, and there was the pornography of death, certain Wehrmacht soldiers taking photos of it. Now, people like to put all the blame on the SS, and indeed the SS were steeped in Nazi ideology, but it was also the German army as such who participated. Again, I'm not saying it's all of them. I'm being fair-minded. Just because someone happened to be in that army at the time doesn't mean that he was a wicked person, and I'm not saying that Allied armies were altogether innocent either. So some German troops raped Soviet women and girls. This crime was not as widespread as one might have expected, bearing in mind that Wehrmacht soldiers could treat the civilian population barbarically and do so with impunity. Sex crimes did not occur on such a huge scale for a reason that German soldiers had been indoctrinated with Nazi ideology and taught them that Soviets were subhuman. Therefore, they must be unattractive. To copulate with a Soviet woman was somehow degrading. This is what the Nazis led their men to believe. Of course, there were German soldiers who were morally courageous, who were humane, and behaved in an honourable fashion, despite the rebarbative and vicious character of their government. If a Red Army soldier escaped from captivity and made it back to Red Army lines, he would not be embraced for his deed of daring do. Indeed, he would fall under suspicion. He had disobeyed orders once by surrendering. They were ordered to fight until death. Troops must never capitulate, no matter how utterly hopeless a situation, and even if they'd run out of ammunition. the escapee might have been permitted to escape by the Germans so he could go back and be a spy. Escapees who got back to the Red Army were sometimes sent to the Gulag, occasionally even executed. This was really a war with no holds barred. It was not like the Western Front, Krieg ohne Hass, as Rommel had said, a war without hate. This is very much a war with hate, a war of annihilation, as Hitler had announced it. So it was particularly wounded soldiers who were captured by the other side might well be tortured to death or even mutilated. If a soldier was wounded and they realised he'd fall into the hands of the enemy because his comrades had to retreat, he might request his comrades administer the coup de grâce, as in the hit of mercy, I suppose, just shooting with the head so he's dead, so he cannot be tortured by the other side. It was preferable to take one's own life than submit to the sadism of the foe. The Soviets had partisans from early in the war. These are guerrillas hiding out in the forests, attacking the enemy's flanks and supply lines. They almost never took prisoners because they couldn't feed them. They couldn't risk his prisoner escaping. They didn't have men to guard these prisoners. If a prisoner escaped, he'd give away where the hideout was in the forest. So the partisans had very little food, had to go to villages and demand they hand over their food. And the villagers were having to produce so much food that the Germans were virtually starving themselves. And the Germans offered hefty rewards of 50 marks for any a Soviet civilian who'd rat out the partisans. How on earth did anybody survive in the occupied territory? Because you've got to collaborate with the Wehrmacht to survive, and the partisans might kill you for doing so. But anyway, if you survived till the Red Army liberated you, you might be killed for having participated in the German occupation, cooperated with them. Anyway, in 1943, the Wehrmacht discovered a mass grave at Katyn. There were the bodies of many thousands of Polish men. The documents in them indicated that none of them had lived beyond April 1941. There were letters and so on dated around them. The Third Reich was very eager to display this example of what the Soviet government got up to. So they invited officials of the International Red Cross and diplomats from neutral and occupied countries to view this evidence for themselves. Moscow blindly denied that this crime had been carried out by its henchmen. It was not until 1990 that Moscow acknowledged that these mass killings hadn't been committed by the NKVD. There were other such mass graves of Polish army officers at Smolensk and other locations. So that's enough for the moment.